Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all, from those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome back to another Wednesday weekly video. Now, today I want to talk to you about D-Day, not the World War II specific D-Day that you might all be familiar with across the globe, but I'm talking about the UK specific D-Day, the second D-Day that we have. It is an abbreviation of what is known as Decimalisation Day, the period in history, that specific day in history where the old pounds, shillings and pence of UK currency, a currency that had been used for over half a millennia, was changed to fall in line with pretty much the rest of the world in decimalising the currency into a standard and more familiar to us now, pounds and pence. The 15th of February 1971, 50 years ago, marked the end of a 1,000-year history using the pounds, shillings and pence method of currency here in the UK or in England, depending on how far you go back. In fact, many other countries across the world, mostly Europe and the imperial states or the empires across the world, would use this pounds, shillings and pence method. But obviously, of course, in relation to the respective different currencies, such as the French franc or the German mark. It's all the same sort of system, but in relation to their own currency. But during the 18th and 19th centuries, this would all change. Most of the powers in Europe and also America would go on to change their system from a complicated pounds, shillings and pence to a simple and more formal version of currency. The first English-speaking country to do so was America back in 1792. They had obviously come out of their American Revolution, proclaimed their independence and left the sort of influence of Britain and the United Kingdom, the British Empire. And so as they were building up their logistical states and their legal systems and all that, they decided that they needed a currency. And it was going to be a decimalised currency, the dollars and cents. And obviously that was proclaimed in 1792. But in Western Europe, the first country to do this was in France. 1795, following the French Revolution and in their sort of first republic, they proclaimed that they were going to change their currency to a simpler sort of decimalised system. And even previous to that, in 1704, the Russians decided that they were going to go decimal by changing their currency to the Russian ruble. And slowly but surely, during the 18th and 19th centuries, many of the countries across the world would change to a simple decimalised system. In fact, the UK and its empire were one of the last countries to use or to go decimal, to change their currency, their old currency, into a new decimalised system. So how does this old currency really work? How does pounds, shillings and pence actually work? Well, to wrap my head around it was a rather difficult task, because there's a lot of terminology and there's a lot of equations that you have to do in your head, sort of, which makes for a very difficult system. But of course, people working with it for nigh on a millennia, half a millennia, whatever, people get it. You know, if you brought up with it, you understand it incredibly well. I've obviously grown up with the pounds and pence system, as have many children over the past 50 years. So in the new system, 100 new pennies, because that's what you're supposed to be calling them, equates to a single English pound sterling. Now, if you look on some of the pennies that were minted during the 1970s, you will see that they actually read new pence or new penny. Obviously, by the time you get to the 80s and the 90s, and obviously today, it's just 1p, 2p. That's it. And because people know that it's penny. It's not a new penny because everybody's sort of grown up with it now. But in the old system, move to the old system now, 240 pennies was equal to 20 shillings, which was equal to £1. And for every 12 pennies, it was 1 shilling. That's the simple bit. That is the simple crux of the system. But then you get into the realms of the terminology. Crowns, sovereigns, florins, guineas, halfpennies. All these different words that were used to denominate different coins and also different currency worths. I have a little chart in front of me which has helped me to sort of figure out and understand what each of these currencies is worth. But if you'd like to sort of call me out on something and say, hold on a minute, you've got that slightly wrong, then please do drop a comment below. So if you'll do me the honour, I'm going to read you some of the terminology and equate to you what each of these coins and each of these currencies was worth. So let's go through some of the terminology that is used. So a farthing is a quarter of a penny. And you've got halfpenny or halfpenny. You've got 1 penny, 2 penny, 3 pence, 6 pence, which is obviously 6 pennies, a shilling, a florin, which is 2 shillings, half a crown, which is worth 2 shillings and 6 pence, a full crown is worth 5 shillings, half a sovereign is 10 shillings, a full sovereign is 20 shillings or a whole single pound, and then to top it all off you have 21 shillings, which is in fact a guinea. So you can sort of see why people were thinking that going to a decimalised system would be a much simpler affair. Just figuring out pence and pounds, 100 to 1, it's a lot simpler. But of course, if you've grown up with this, and of course the currency being used for, well, centuries, you're obviously going to know what this means, you're obviously going to understand it better, and you're going to obviously be very sceptical of the new system. But thankfully, when it was announced that decimalisation was going to be put in place, this was announced in 1967, people had time to understand what the new currency was going to be worth. And actually on Decimalisation Day and in the lead up to it, shops across the country, post offices, banks, shops, grocery stores, whatever, had separate charts that would tell them what old currency meant in new currency. So if we take, say, a farthing, which is obviously, as I said, a quarter of a penny in old money. In today's money, a quarter of a penny is worth 10p. A farthing is worth 10p in new money. So these charts were very helpful in giving people the opportunity to figure out what each of these currencies was worth. And of course, in schools as well, children were being taught how to use the new system and how to convert the new system. And in fact, some of the children were teaching their parents how to use the new currency system. Banks were allowed to close a couple of days early so that they could go through the backlog of the old pounds, shillings and pence cheques and credits, so that when it came to opening on 10 a.m. on the 15th of February, on D-Day, they were able to just work in the new currency pounds and pence. But a couple of different companies went decimal a little bit early and a little bit late. If you look at the rail companies and the sort of Transport for London, they went decimal the day previous, on the 14th of February. And the bus companies decided to go decimal on the 21st of February. They were still allowing people to use the old system on D-Day, on the 15th of February, but by the time you get to the 21st, they were then deciding to use just new money, just so that people, again, could convert, could understand what the new currency meant to them. So let me take you through the backstory of what was actually happening prior to D-Day, prior to Decimalisation Day. In 1961, there was the agreement amongst Britain and amongst the government saying that we should really go decimal. Most of the world has gone decimal and we are very much behind the times. But it would take until 1966 that the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the time, James Callaghan, decided, right, Britain, we are definitely going to go decimal. He introduced the Decimal Currency Bill and it was passed in 1967. So, a date was set a momentous occasion was going to happen and new money was needing to be minted. On the 23rd of April 1968, new 5p and 10p pieces were put into circulation. A new 50p piece was put into circulation by the 14th of October 1969, and a new halfpenny was introduced in the July of 1969 as well. Now the halfpenny, we don't use the halfpenny anymore because they were taken out of circulation in 1984. Some people in 1984 suggested that the halfpenny was integral to fighting inflation and fighting the rise of vastly increasing prices. But of course, as you start to introduce new currency, you have to withdraw and cease to have legal tender. So in September of 1971, a few months after Decimalisation Day, the old 1p and 3p pieces were taken out of circulation and ceased to be legal tender. One of the interesting things, though, is that despite having most of the currency that we have today, the 20p piece that you might recognise, the sort of almost hexagonal, octagonal shape coin that we have, the 20p piece, wasn't actually part of the immediate decimalisation system, because the 20p piece was only introduced in 1982. Now, when it comes to banknotes, there was no real need to change anything. Banknotes had been part of the UK economy since the 1790s, so there was no real need to change it into a more decimalised system because a pound was still a pound. But what did change was the design and the size of these particular notes. When it comes to Decimalisation Day and the years following, a new series of notes with designs of certain famous figures from British history. Now, if you remember a video I made months and months ago, so well into early last year, I talked about the introduction of a new £20 note featuring the famous painter J.M.W. Turner. And each and every 10 to 15 years, they change the faces on what the banknotes are going to be. So you've had sort of Alan Turing to be introduced this year. You've got J.M.W. Turner. You've had Winston Churchill. You've had Charles Darwin as some of the images and some of the famous faces that have been portraited on certain banknotes. And this all started sort of in the late 70s and early 80s. The £1 actually was a note until 1983. They were replaced, and the legal tender of these notes sort of ceased to be sort of a few months following. And when it comes to the £2 coin, that was only introduced about 22 years ago in 1998. Previous to that, you'd had commemorative £2 coins that weren't really worth anything. In the 1980s and 1990s, special occasions were commemorated with a £2 coin. So to show that these new £2 coins that were going to be legal tender were different, they made them into a bimetallic compound. That's why you have a sort of a golden outrim at the sort of outer shell, and then you have a sort of a more white looking sort of silvery coloured coin in the middle. So D-Day went off without a hitch, without too much of a problem. There were charts, people were given enough time, the circulation of new money was created and put out forth to the population, and people began to understand the system a little bit better. And obviously kids now are fully aware and only know what the decimalisation system really was. It was, after all, 50 years ago. But after the sort of 30-year point, just after the 30-year point, the UK could have gone in a very different direction, sort of economically and currency-wise. You see, the European Union was formed in the early 1990s with the Treaty of Maastricht, 1992. And in their little treaty, they decided that they were going to have a euro currency, a European currency, called the Eurozone, the euro. You could either opt in or you could opt out. 19 of the 27 member states decided to opt in for the European currency, the euro. The UK decided that we weren't going to do that. Gordon Brown, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, spoke to Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, and they agreed that being in the Eurozone wasn't in the UK's best interests, and being part of the European country, we just didn't simply want to do it. So we never did. And perhaps we might have dodged a bullet there, because had we been part of the Euro, Brexit might have been a very different set of circumstances. We would have had to have probably changed back into a pounds and pence system. And who knows what could have happened in those negotiating processes, or how smoothly that changeover would have been. Furthermore, a few years down the line after the euro was introduced, Greece had a bit of a debt problem with the euro, and there were a lot of big bailouts that were happening that were sort of threatening the euro's strength in sort of the world economy. The euro is still technically the second most dominant and second most powerful currency in the world, after obviously the US dollar, but it was being threatened in 2008, 2009 with a eurozone crisis. So who knows where we could have been standing had we gone down that euro road. But now we're entering a new phase of currency. We're still using the pounds and pence system, but we're now entering a phase where cash isn't always necessarily king, as the old saying goes. You see, credit cards, debit cards are now becoming the new form of currency payment. In this time of virus crises, we are being told not to sort of exchange currency, because currency is the biggest sort of holder of viruses and bacteria, and obviously the exchanging of physical money can obviously spread disease and virus and bacteria to a lot of different people. So we're all being encouraged to use our debit and credit cards. So where did this debit credit card come from? Well, the first UK credit card was the Barclay card, which was introduced in 1966. And the first money sort of machines, the first ATMs, the cash machines, were introduced about 2 or 3 years later. But the origins of the humble credit card actually come from America, about 1958 in Fresno. You see, there were introductions in previous years trying to get people to use a card payment, but people were skeptical using them in those early periods, and not many people had them. And with not many people having them, a lot of the banks and a lot of the shops and a lot of the city malls or whatever weren't really accepting them. So it was a bit of a chicken and the egg situation. Do you use it but nobody accepts it, or do you accept it but not get very many people coming in through the doors using them? That all obviously changed in Fresno 1958 with the Bank of America. 45% of the population of Fresno used their Bank of America. So 66,000 credit cards were sent out to the Bank of America people. And so they were able to use their credit cards more. And so the Bank of America also encouraged supermarkets and shops and other establishments to accept these card payments. So that is sort of the beginnings of where we get the card payments from. And that is pretty much the end of the video. I know I've taken a slightly topsy-turvy route to explaining these certain pieces, like the decimalisation, how the old currency works, the jargon that goes with it, and obviously, going on to a little bit of detail about the euro and, credit cards as well, which has obviously become a very important sort of asset to currency payments in today's world. If you have enjoyed what you've seen and you have enjoyed what I've had to say about these things, then please do click the little thumbs up button down in that direction of the screen. And if you want to subscribe to this channel and you want to support me even more, then click the little red button that is down in that direction. If by any chance, and probably there are some things that I've got wrong or I might need to be slightly amended on, this is a very difficult thing to wrap your head around, especially people like me who only have known this new system of money. If you want to make any comments about it, then please do drop it down below. Other than that, I'm going to leave you all here. I'm going to wish you a happy rest of your day. Stay safe, and I will see you next week, hopefully. See you later.